The way members of a band or an orchestra communicate with one another through their music is very important. If every single player is playing something super complex or super simple, then it tends to just sort of flatline. It doesn't have the nice juxtaposition of I can choose to tune my ear to listen to the simple element or to listen to the more complex element. We don't have enough on the palette to give us a variety, even though everything sort of interlocks together. When you have complex and non-complex elements, we can still choose to separate and listen to different elements. But if everything is complex, everything's harder to listen to. And if everything's super simple, then it's just kind of boring. So my guide for you for now is listen to the rhythm section, especially the drums. Are the drums doing something super complex? If they are, keep your melody a little bit more simple and singable. I mean, think about metal. You have really heavy drums, and what's the singer doing over top? Almost operatic style, what you could call bel canto vocals. A beautiful voice happening over top. But it's not like rap and metal fused. Am I saying rap and metal fused is a bad thing or you shouldn't do it? Not necessarily. I'm just saying there's a lot of complex elements. The complexity of the rhythm of the voice, the complexity of the density of the drums, and then likely many other instruments over top. But if the drums are doing something more complex and your voice is sort of floating over top, there's a nice juxtaposition and everything kind of feels like it's fitting into place. It's like if you had a pizza and you had one topping that was really adventurous, that could be fun. But if every topping is really adventurous and really sort of extreme on the palate, then you can't really differ all the flavors very well and it becomes a little bit overwhelming. So when you're coming up with your melody, just ask yourself, how complex is the instrumentation overall, especially the rhythm section? And if that changes section to section, then so can you. Maybe the verse is very complex instrumentally, but your voice is floating over top in that bel canto style. Maybe the chorus, everything breaks down quite a bit, and it gives you the opportunity to be a little bit more nimble and dense with your vocal rhythms. Rhythms aside, if the pitched instruments are moving wide leaps all over the place, you're probably best to keep your melody a little bit more grounded through repetition, small steps, and skips. But if you have instrumentation that's just sort of chugging around in one spot, then maybe you can get more adventurous with the leaps that you take and the sort of breadth or width of your vocal range. Now, we're not always trying to do the exact opposite. Complex drums, simple rhythm. Complex guitar, simple motion with your melody. It tends to be an easy formula to work with, but at the same time, there's going to be moments where you might want to perfectly match a guitar riff that is complex. Maybe the riff is playing and you're singing that same riff. So it really depends on what you're going for, what the stylistic aesthetics are, and also when and how to break the rules. The longer you do this, the more you're going to have a good idea as to how you want to break the rules and what rules you want to break. Now, if you're thinking, Josh, I'm a beginner musician, I don't want to have to learn this over the next 10 years of band practice. I mean, you don't have to. Just a lot of listening to whatever style you're enthusiastic about is really going to help. So because the voice doesn't really supply harmony outside of maybe outlining chord shapes through a broken fashion, you're really listening to the band's rhythm and what the motion is of the pitched instruments. We're not going to call it a melody, but it could be a counter melody or the motion of those chord progressions. So rhythm, and then the width or leaps of the pitched instruments, and trying to juxtapose those in a nice, easy way. I think if you're doing that more than you're not, then you're good. And if you want to do complex with complex sometimes, or really simple with really simple, that's fine too. But as a general starting point, especially for beginners, make sure that you're sort of challenging what the rest of the band is doing to make sure that you're fitting into your pocket. I'm not saying challenging with bad notes or bad rhythms. I'm just saying if the band is complex, lay it back a little bit. If they're simple, you can bring it up a little bit in terms of that complexity. It's a simple concept, but I think it's really important, so make sure that you're considering the overall band and what they're doing and how your role fits in as a, let's say, singer, but at the same time it might be first chair violinist, a synthesizer player on an electronic track, etc. If you're in charge of the melody, listen to what the band is doing and fit your melody in around that. Now, we've zoomed out quite a bit and taken a look at melodies from a more broad perspective. But if you're still not sure how to create a melody, in the next class we're going to talk about some approaches that you can take. Something a little more zoomed in, but we're not going to be digging into the weeds of the theory quite yet. So after the next class, we'll dig into some theory. But in this next class, we'll be talking about melodic approaches. I'll see you there.